You know, the Herb Martin that at least I know after being here for 15 years is this very gentle and kind soul. I taught his daughter Julia for a couple classes, and I've worked teaching with Sue Martin for 4 years. Sue, and this is the angry Herb Martin. This is his 4-letter word book, 1973. S blank 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 and storm, and that was the. I mean, like, there's many sides to this person. There's many sides. If you've had a chance to read his poetry, this is a very complex individual. He's also a composer. Has written an opera. Written more than one. I think you even wrote one. I think we learned from Ron's book when you were very young. So there's been, and there are the papers in Toledo. If any of us get turned on to different aspects of his life and want to learn more, we can go to Toledo, where they negotiated for his papers, I guess in the late 70s, and there's a scholarship in your mother's name at Toledo, so it's pretty exciting. Now, just in terms of earthly factors, if UD people that teach here sign this sheet when it goes around, you will be happier for having done that. That's the proof that you were here sheet. I want to thank Herb. He turned, he's gotten a lot of us interested in different arts over many years, but for the core program over the last 3 years, for the Dunbar Centennial, the Centennial of Dunbar's death, there was that really incredible art series performance of Dunbar that Professor Martin did, and we had 30 core students that went to it, and then with Dr. Betty Youngkin's urging, we then built 4 weeks of that year in the first year core program around Dunbar, and it really, we learned an awful lot from that, and we also got introduced to Afro-American Dayton, which turns out to be one of the more important cities in the North before the First World War in terms of the Afro-American experience. And so we learned that that Dunbar wasn't like just a genius that came from nowhere, that there was a whole culture here that he was part of. And so we've studied in the core program the last 3 years. Every year we've devoted 3 or 4 weeks out of the year, which is, these are 6-hour weeks, not 3-hour weeks, to the study of Afro-American Dayton. And he has been instrumental at getting us excited and then to learn about Dayton. But today we want to hear Professor Martin doing his poetry, and I'd like to introduce Professor Ron Primo to introduce Herb.
Thank you, John. One of my undergraduate professors was Louis Martyr, who edited the Shakespeare newsletter. He was just a wonderful teacher, and he got students enthused all the time, and the way he did it was he modeled things. And I remember one day he came into class and said that he was going to a production of Hamlet for about the 11th time, and he was in a line to buy tickets, and there was a young lady in front of him talking to her friend. "What's this play about?" she said. And he said to them, "Excuse me, young ladies, I envy you tremendously." And they said, "What? I don't understand." "You're going to see Hamlet for the first time, and I can never do that again." And that's the kind of stuff Professor Martyr said to us all the time, and we didn't know what the heck he meant, but we learned from his modeling. But if there's anyone here who has never seen Herb perform before, I admire you in the same way. I mean, I envy you in the same way, because I can't do that again. But this is about the 20th time I've probably had a chance to introduce Herb, not only see him. So I am extremely fortunate. But I'm really honored to be able to do this at the University of Dayton. I've never had a chance. I never thought I would have the chance to introduce Herb in Dayton. Usually he's introducing all the visiting dignitaries, right? And then you folks introduce him. I want to start by thanking John so much for alerting us to the fact this is coming. Later on, you'll get to meet filmmaker David Schock, who said I shouldn't mention him, but I can do what I want because I'm up here. And he's specializing in murder, mayhem, and Martin at the moment. A lot of his movies have to do with solving unsolved murders. We hope that doesn't happen here, but he's also a brilliant documentary filmmaker about literary figures. And we've been talking about doing this movie for a long time, and about a year ago we really planned it. And then all of a sudden John appears with this thing, and so when are we going to come to Dayton pretty much got solved. So we're here, and we've been around, and everybody's been so cooperative. I want to thank Brian Conniff also, who has been so supportive. At one point I got in touch with him and said, you know, we're going to write this grant and we're going to get this money and it's going to come to you. And he knew what was going on. He wasn't born yesterday. You get all the indirect costs, you get to toss in more money, you get to do all kinds of things. But everywhere I've gone, it's a tribute to Herb that everybody wants to cooperate, which is exactly the case. Give a professor a microphone and he might talk forever. I would like to talk for hours about Herb, but I'm not going to because we came to see him. But I have known Herb, and he is, I'm proud to call him friend, for about 37 years. My wife Kathy, who is back there next to Herb's wife Sue, and I went to Toledo to a conference in 1971 on modern literature. And we were in the audience. There was some good stuff going on. Morris Beebe was there, and Wally from Toledo and all this, and Herb's home, Toledo, you know, undergraduate school and all that stuff. So it was neat. But we didn't know him at all. But during the question and answer period, this brash young man stands up. John just showed you a picture of an angry man. Well, he has this other side too. He's not only angry, but on a mission. And he got up to speak to this audience that had the likes of Cleance Brooks and a number of other people. And he told them that they were the reason why young people were getting turned off to literature, because they really didn't understand contemporary literature at all, much less modernism. And see here now, he said, as you know he can say. And it shook up the place. The place thunderously applauded at that point. My wife and I said, who is this? We have to meet this person. And we went and met him, and he invited us to come to a party. He said, I'm a writer, I write some stuff. I'm in town here and I have the party going on, you guys should come. We didn't go, but we had this brash man's phone number and invited him to come up to read at Central Michigan University, where I had just started. It was my very first appointment. It was the first 2 months of my career. Talk about being lucky, meeting Herb Martin in the first 2 months of your career and still having him an integral part of everything. Someone said the other day that things are coming full circle. I love that image because circles don't end. They just keep getting deeper. And the fact that Herb has been a part of me is started at that point. He came up to Central Michigan, received, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just, somebody stood up in the audience and said, some people yell, and some people sing, and some people do this, and some people do that, and you do it all. And the audience in a room about twice this size rose up and started cheering and clapping and all this. And it was amazing. And then Herb came up to be a visiting distinguished professor at CMU, brought all the poets with him. The next thing, though, I'm going to stop soon, I promise. 1972, Dayton was the center of the literary universe. And you might have heard of this, and some of you might have even been there. I was there. I and 2 of my colleagues and a whole bunch of students came down in 3 Central Michigan vans, and we attended the Paul Laurence Dunbar Centennial. Herb really did not, this is not just Herb's self-deprecation, he really didn't have any idea what was going to happen. He had no idea what was going to happen because Dunbar was out of favor, to say the least. The Black Arts movement had taught everybody that they should be wary of this stuff or maybe ashamed of it. Dialect, yuck. Who's going to deal with all this stuff? We don't know how to do it anyway. And Herb said, a book opened just sort of opened one day and reminded him that it was going to be Dunbar, the centennial of Dunbar's birth. Out of his office is Dunbar's grave. All kinds of things are beginning to happen. Somebody at UD had the enormous good sense to hire him away from Aquinas College where he was. So he decided to invite all these people. He had no idea how he was going to pay for anything. They all showed up, and then he had no idea. He had a schedule in mind, but he had no idea how he was going to get poets to cooperate. Can you imagine getting 30 or 40 poets to cooperate? They're all downtown partying in the hotels and doing this and that and the other thing, and nobody knows what they're going to do. Margaret Walker was there. Margaret Walker took over and said, everything will be all right, Herb, relax. And she said, I'll show you how to do it. And they decided to start the centennial by reading all the way through the Dunbar canon. And she stood up and read Dunbar for a while, some by heart, some from the manuscript. And Herb has paid tribute to her later in books by saying, for Margaret Walker, the person who taught me how to sight read Dunbar. And the rest of the people relaxed. You could just see it happening. Michael Harper, Nikki Giovanni, Alice Walker, Mary Evans, Raymond Patterson. I don't know, I could go on and on. They all started relaxing. Well, maybe we do know how to do this. They knew they kind of liked it because somebody had read it to them or sung it to them, an aunt or a grandmother or somebody. But academically, it was totally out of fashion. Herb has never cared what's in fashion or out of fashion. He's himself. Yesterday, boy, what a tribute this was. Yesterday we were interviewing Sue, his wife, and to have your wife say this after all these years, she said, Herb's the real deal. He doesn't depend on other people influencing him or advising him. He appreciates their advice, but he doesn't depend on it. And so Dayton, he created a Dunbar revival. There's no doubt about it. From that point, the poets all got back in touch with Dunbar. They got back in touch with the oral tradition. The scholars followed suit. There was another celebration in Irvine that year that didn't mean a whole lot, but it was nice. It was really nice. Dayton is what counted. And Dayton, and just think, all of this stuff that Herb has connected people with. Dayton is important for the Wright brothers and for Paul Laurence Dunbar, but equally so for Herbert Woodward Martin. The 70s and 80s, Herb was, I'm pleased to say, up at Central Michigan University once in a while. He still teaches for us. We have a Master's in Humanities program. He teaches for us in Detroit and Ann Arbor. We're still able to get him to come up. The 70s and 80s, the 80s especially, were the Sue years, the Julia years, the Marina years, the Christian years, the Athena years. It were family poems. If you look back through all this stuff, there are periods in his career. That never stopped. The family period never stopped. It just grew into a whole bunch of different stuff. We came to hear Herb, not me. So it's time to hear him. But the one other thing I want to say is that if you want to know more about Herb, you know Herb. Some of you know Herb extremely well. If you want to know more about him, go to the University of Toledo Kennedy Center Library collection, one of the best collections of American writers, period, in this country. It's a terrific collection. They have the Herbert W. Martin papers, which are growing by the minute. And as he keeps doing things. And Sue should be thanked for that collection because she told Herb that he was a pack rat of effluvium. And I had no idea what she was talking about. I had to run and look up effluvium, but she's absolutely right. And a creative effluvium, to say the least. You should go down there and see this stuff. It is an amazing collection of manuscripts and correspondence. Herb knew in high school he was going to be famous. Go read all the stuff that happened in high school. I am so honored to introduce my friend Herbert Martin.
Well, you're lucky to have Sue here. I brought everything, but now that she's here, I will only read half of what I brought. The jokes go by like that, so you have to be quick and catch them. Part of that is because she would not want me to make you suffer all afternoon. So what I'm going to do is just read you some things and let you ask some questions. Perhaps tell you some of the things I think, perhaps not, I don't know. We're going to start out with explaining the second book, because the second book is really... Can she read?
No,
Oh, dear.
no, she can't.
No, she can't? Okay. Second book looks like this. So I have to tell you that somebody, when it came out, it's the only book that has sold out in a whole year right away. And it has never been reprinted. So I think John found one on the internet for $200 or some outrageous thing like that. The original price was, I think, $250 or something like that. So I would never pay however much for it, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, the story behind the book is, it goes something like this, and then I will tell you how I came to this title. The two epigraphs, and then there's a third one, which I really probably already knew. And it goes something like this. First, Richard Wright. Lord, man, if it wasn't for them police and them old lynch mobs, there wouldn't be nothing but uproar down here. The second one comes from Eldridge Cleaver, and I was reading him, and it says, I say after Mailer, there's a shitstorm coming. And at that point, I thought that would make a marvelous title. And so I put it aside, and of course, I went home and I said, I have a new book coming, Mama, and it's going to be called blah, blah, blah. And she said, you can't put that on a title. And so, of course, I called the publisher up and said, my mother objects strenuously to this title. He says, well, if you find another one that's equally as good, we'll change it. And so I waited for about a month and a half, and nothing really happened. And so I called him and said, go ahead, I'll deal with my mother later. And so that's how it came. But the third epigraph goes something like this. Been in the storm so long, been in the storm so long, children, been in the storm so long, just give me little time to pray. And when I remembered that, I thought, that's the right title, and we should, should leave it like that. I'm going to read you these two poems, because I didn't put them in the selected poems, and John asked me if I would read them, and so I thought, okay. It's simply called Poem, because I think everything needs to have a title, like every child has a name. Every person has a name, so all the poems have to have names as well. And anyway, that gives you a little clue to what the piece might be about. Poem. God is a prisoner behind the black man's teeth, where the tongue has forgotten the taste of human things. Death, my brother, my distinguisher, count my fingers, count my bones. We need each other to see. A second poem titled that. I am not a violent man. I've tried Christ, but one slap on either of these cheeks I think will sufficiently do. Don't you give in to no foolish impulse. Ain't no telling what I might do. Now, I thought that to explain this, one of those terribly stereotypical comments about black people is that if you get them to smile, the whole room brightens up, or the light comes on. So if you're in the dark, you ask the black person to smile, and so that because they have inordinately white teeth, we assume. Mine are not like that, so I'm, on the edge somewhere. But at any rate, that's part of it, and that's why I decided that metaphor, God is a prisoner behind the black man's teeth. So then the teeth become like bars, and I don't need to tell you much more about that, let you ask me. And then the second one is, as a Christian, you're supposed to go the second mile. And we're told that if somebody hits you on one, you turn the other cheek. But then after that, there are no directions. So and that's what I'm hoping that you will come to. If you decide that you're going to hit me twice or a third time, then you're really in trouble, because he didn't say that we couldn't hit back at that point. Even given Martin Luther King Jr. So that's I think, part of the early period. Here are two Antigone poems, and if you read my introduction, it explains why they're Antigone poems. I don't have to tell you that. But this is number 4. He has looked long enough in service at her window, Ortega y Gasset. She is never there to his eyes. There is a distinct possibility that she never was. That if there is a motive to love, they will never finger it among formal figures. There is less ability to say, love, there are certain conditions we cannot have. You exhaust the heart with such a truth. He sits and cleans one fingernail with another. The rain begins to destroy the possibility of leaves. The voice in his head moves music through water. There is no regret at loving a simple music. He searches the annoyance that burns his ear. There are certain conditions we cannot have, Ortega y Gasset. This particular love never knew its dying. Ortega y Gasset comes from, I was working in New York, and Meridian Press had published a volume of his essays on love. And I was lucky enough, when they would do that, they'd give me a copy. And so I was reading Ortega y Gasset, and that's how he gets into that poem. That's something you didn't want to know. I was sure I was 21 or 22 before I ever tasted liquor at all. And my college friends were appalled that I hadn't gone to the beer taverns or went with them. And so they insisted that I go with them after a play once. And then they had decided what kind of drink I would like. And forever after that, I have liked whiskey sours because that's what they decided that I would like. And after I began to teach, I realized how significant beer was. And when I came here, I realized even more how significant beer was. And so it sort of creeps in, though I've never really become a connoisseur of beers at all. It does get into the poems in strange ways. Antigone 7. I write intoxicated because you too have teased me into other worlds and times. Otherwise, I might never voice these moments that move my mind. I dream in a bed, in a room not bounded by walls. Sleep is still possible. It is the fuse that guides the fire. So slowly I burn my candle down. Walk quietly with me through these nervous recollections. I will tell you that sin, as naked as we lay in the late afternoon, will find no blood to slip into, to be redeemed by. We are not requited, shy, shamed, inhibited, speaking only as we can through outward movement. We must start to peel the paint off the walls to find what is underneath. Antigone 8, Tavern Piece. Some feelings are impossible to touch. They are like in the mid-afternoon, once while listening to Spanish songs when the yellow sun blazed through the blinds, bringing with it the forms of black leaves. I could hear the music, see the vision, move my hands through the space, shadow displacing shadow. Some feelings are impossible. You, woman, who are so lovely in your haste, what are you like when you are still? When you do not have to move so swiftly from table to table? Here in your world where people order bottles of dreams, how do you keep all their possibilities in mind? They are like the reflection that streamed through the window once in the mid-afternoon. What Italian master cut your face in flesh? How well you have kept his art. How do you walk in the 3 a.m. air? Is it fresh to you? Do you have other arms to walk you in warmth? Beer always spins my mind, weaves it, catches it in a multitude of possibilities, like sunlight and form of leaves. It is a vision the hand cannot hold. And that was about a waitress in Grand Rapids that used to go with my students to the tavern. And she was a lovely, lovely lady. And I thought trying to catch her and put her in words somehow. And the last Antigone is named after the play and the heroine of the play. And somebody, while I was in New York, decided that I was a cat person. And she was the receptionist at World Publishing. And her Siamese cat had a litter of cats. She kept telling me I must come by her house and take this cat home. And I said, no, I do not want cats. I do not want a cat. I do not want a cat. And finally, she enticed me to come by for some strange reason. And I walked in her house, and she presented me with this Siamese cat. And it was impossible to leave the cat there. And I named the cat Antigone after the character in the play, because it seemed to me that this cat was really very devoted to me. She got out one time and was gone for a day and a half to 2 days. And I had left a little room like at the window, just in case when I left home, and hoping that nobody would break in and take what little goods I had. And one morning, the second morning, the cat was at the window. And I thought, well, it was the right name. And that's how these poems get called Antigone poems. You didn't want to know that either. But nevertheless, Antigone 18, Tavern Piece. Antigone, beer courses through me like a river, freshly through mountains or underground streams that break gently through the earth. The smoke in taverns aches my eyes. I watch a young man peruse his girl with his fingers. I think they will go out into the wind and accept the challenge of love. Otherwise, I shall write a million fantasies about leaves on water. Sit close to me, woman. Be next to me like a stab of pain in the heart. Rip my flesh. Love is buried in my bones. It aches to rise and become my skin, follicle and hair, frightened. Oh, the rush of love is pain. When I was in New York, one of the things that I found after I found a job working in the mailroom and cataloging everybody's manuscript that came in and then got rejected, and I would look at it and I would write it down in a huge dummy book just to make sure that we hadn't rejected something that became a bestseller. I wanted to follow it and see how long those manuscripts would take before they got accepted somewhere else. And as I was doing that, I figured out how to work, and then I went to the Lutheran church, and every Sunday they had a Bach cantata being given. And so I joined the choir and sang in the choir for many, many years. And then I decided that if you could understand Bach, the SATB, and all those groups singing together, that perhaps you could write a poem and have two voices, and that it would make perfectly good sense. There's another man, Jackson McLowe, who was influenced by John Cage, who would do kinds of poems. And they were based on spacing and vocalizing. And rhythmically bringing all of that together he would write really good poems. And so I thought, well, if Jackson can get away with that, surely I can get away with a contrapuntal poem. And I called them contrapuntal after Bach and the sense of counterpoint, because you have two voices running counter to each other. I wrote 6 of them, and I gave them to a friend of mine. By that time, I'd moved to Buffalo and was doing other things besides going to graduate school. And he said they work every way but one. And I thought, wow, I'm out of the box that I painted myself into. I'm out of that corner now. So Fred Redding opened it up to another way. If you haven't, I don't know what the page is, but it's number 7. And I will read to you. Maybe I can tell you what page?
30.
30, page 30. This is how it works. And do you wonder why we came to touch so close, fearing neither kiss nor embrace, hungering between two worlds? In those last 2 months, I found an allowance of courage to drive my image straight. And do you wonder why, in those last 2 months, we came to touch so close? I found an allowance of courage, fearing neither kiss nor embrace, to drive my image straight, hungering between two worlds. Hungering between two worlds, fearing neither kiss nor embrace, we came to touch so close. And do you wonder why? To drive my image straight, I found an allowance of courage in those last 2 months. Hungering between two worlds, to drive my image straight, fearing neither kiss nor embrace, I found an allowance of courage. We came to touch so close in those last 2 months. And do you wonder why? So then, thank you. At which point in my career I said, watch out, old Shakespeare. You're in trouble now. So at that point, when you're young, you can be arrogant and you can probably get away with those things. And I thought of all sorts of things while I was living in New York, and to really make me famous. And then I would get very close to doing that silly thing. And then I'd ask myself very seriously, if you do this, will you have enough talent to sustain you after this awful thing that you have done? And so then I would always back away from it. And so in some ways I became, kind of reserved and less foolhardy, I can remember going to E.E. Cummings's house in Patchen Place and opening the gate, walking up to the door and about to knock on the door, and then thinking, what a terrible thing to disturb E.E. Cummings. Leave this poor man alone. And then I backed out of the yard and closed the gate behind me. And I think within a month he had passed away, and I really began to kick myself because I should have gone and knocked on the door, and I didn't do that. So there are times when I have knocked on the door. I went searching in Italy, in Venice, and found Pound and knocked Ezra Pound and knocked on the door. So I was happy that I had done that. Didn't manage Elliot, but the other guy I did. So, if you ask me a question, this gets easier to do, and it's a lot of. It may be even a little bit more fun for you if you ask me a question. By the way, you have this little piece of paper. Write one word on there that you would like to write. Any word. And I saw your hand.
I wanted to ask you about if you could say something about what the Black Arts movement was like and how it might have influenced you. Or you were part of it to some degree.
Well, there was something called Umbra in New York, and we had a big fight over a poem that said something mean-spirited or salacious, and I think that Kennedy had been assassinated, and so we divided. Half of the group said publish the poem, the other half says it's not tasteful, don't publish it. And I must have been on this side. And I've always sort of been that way. I just thought there's decorum and there's taste. And sometimes, as my mother would say, you know, mind your manners. You've been taught that. You didn't have to go to school to learn manners. And when you go out in public, you need to practice. And so I think I offended a number of the black people on this side. And I think they've held it against me all these years. But so what? Now that the documentary is coming out saying, serves you right, you know. But no, it's not, you know, you really do have to have. But they were gifted people. And what I think we really started out doing was that we had found up to that point in the 70s that all of the anthologies left the black people out. Now, maybe Gwendolyn Brooks got in there, and maybe Robert Hayden got in there, County Cullen and Claude McKay and Langston Hughes, and that was it. And all the ladies got shoved aside, and all the young black writers got shoved aside, and the prose writers, Richard Wright and Ralph Ellison. And I remember once John Williams, who wrote the Man Who Is Nobody or something like that, and he said, they always think that it's only Ellison and Wright, and none of us ever get published because of them. And so they started to publish their own works. And Dudley Rand out of Detroit published a huge amount of black poets and went bankrupt doing it because he was so invested in getting our work out. And so many times we would go to Detroit and give readings to bankroll the next publications that were coming out and to help out in that way. But I think that that was the reason for the Black Arts movement, was that we had just been left out of all those anthologies. And then finally the students on campus began to get angry and agitate for black literature and black courses in literature, and so there was a real need for those books, and so somebody started to publish us, and we got into the anthologies. I got into the Norton Anthology of Poetry through the back door, and this is a joke, but it's true. Robert Hayden wrote a poem about Dunbar, and he inscribed, it said, for Herbert Martin. And so I'm in the Norton Anthology. I got in by the back door. But that's all right, I got in there. So somebody asked Professor Labadie if that was the Herb Martin that taught here. And of course she said, in a very proper way, of course it is. Yes. Did I see your hand?
Yes, does your poem ballad have music? And do you want it to have music?
I would love to have it have music. Some of the pieces have been set by Phil Magnuson, who is the composer here. Some have been set by Joseph Finnemore, a composer and pianist. And I've worked with Adolphus Hailstork, but not with setting my poems, but with creating a whole new libretto. And I really do not, what shall I say, object to somebody coming across this book and setting these poems. This is one of those early ones where I wrote as an undergraduate in rhythm and rhyme, and everything had to be, kind of pristine. So when I went to New York, I thought, oh my God, they're going to kill me. Because I was writing in rhythm and rhyme, and everybody was following the beats and the Black Arts movement, and all of that stuff I later found had been put in the middle of the poem rather than ding dong, ding dong, ding. The rhymes were in the middle, so you couldn't discover it, but it was there. And they were gifted it enough to figure out how to do that so that they would still be contemporary and outrageous and all those things. But this is simply called Ballad. I'll read it. Waste not all your youth on study, nor give it all to frivolity. I have come some years to 40. Take my eyes and see. All that the body's constitution serves inches closer and closer to the grave. For my generation and their nerves, there is nothing they can save. Take some care for lying in the summer grass. Make your house from the hardest stone. Beware, a brick will trip an unsure foot. Observe, it can break a bone. Take water, take wine, work the earth, eat bread, feel the warmth in its flame. Every man has but one birth. Find the purest marble and inscribe your name. And, I read that. This is a really old poem, and I thought that's the title to the selected poems, inscribing my name. And that as you write one poem after the other, you are in some ways chiseling that marble and trying to figure out how to leave something permanent behind. And one of the other things is we tend to think that our poems as poets are our children, and we hope to, send them out into the world and hope they survive on their own. And if they do, and if they have a fairly good life, that is, they get anthologized and reprinted, they will carry your name forward. So I think that that's part of it. Yes?
What do you do about the children that refuse to leave your home?
They get sent off to Toledo.
I was speaking of the poems, by the way.
Pardon me?
I was speaking of the poems, those problem children.
Yes. Well, what happens, though, really is that they get revised and revised and revised. And if I kill them off, then of course they get put in the box and sent to Toledo. But hopefully, I'm trying to say, listen to the poem, but also tell the poem how I think it ought to operate on the page. So it's a collaboration. If I say, you will do this, then the thing is destroyed in my hands and it never recovers if I beat it into submission. But if I ask it to tell me what it wants to be and we come to some agreement about that, then it turns out to be a fairly decent poem. And sometimes the editors will tell me that a phrase or a verb is not right. And they'll ask me, did you mean this thing or this thing? And I take that seriously. I'm not insulted by that. And I will write out two versions, one my way and one their way, and see which one comes out of my mouth and back into my ear and sounds right. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you ever forget something that you've written, especially as you're archiving your materials, and after a few years, you look back and you find something in your stash, and
Yeah.
you're like, did I really write that?
Yes,
Or-
that's why it says selected poems, new, used, and repossessed. That's because when I was doing this, I went back through all those and I thought, oh my, I've really forgotten that piece. And it really does work. It's doing fairly well by itself. And so I ought to repossess it, and I ought to start to read it again at readings. There were some that I would, when I first went to New York, I read this. I think it's called Song. Edith Sitwell, does she sit well with her classical, well-trained mind? Yes, Dame Sitwell, quite well sits well on her pinnacle far from hell. Here she nourishes and she flourishes with her cry, good poems to sell. and I was intrigued by Edith Sitwell. She's a very grand lady and always came out in long flowing robes, and she had huge rings on the fingers, and she belonged to the Sitwell family, and they were all writers, and I just admired her, and then was caught up with her and paired her with Marianne Moore, and I thought, well, I can't go wrong with these two. And the Sitwell poems sort of calmed everything down in New York for me when I first started to read. And because I was really afraid of all that foolishness. And I used my father's name and my maternal grandfather's name when I was introduced Les Deux May Go for that first reading. So I was David Dave. And I got up and I read my poems. And to my amazement, they liked them and they applauded. And I went back and sat down and I thought, well, I don't have to use that pseudonym any longer, because along came a little note asking me if I would like to join the writer's workshop that many people like Howard Ant and Diane Wachowski, and I'm trying to think of Carol Berger and a number of other people who went on to write novels and huge volumes of poetry. And I thought, I've got to get rid of that name now. And so I wrote back and said, yes, I would like to, and I signed my name, Herb Martin. And they were polite enough never to ask me why I used that pseudonym. So that's how that went away. But I was really afraid that since there weren't any four-letter words in the poems, that I was going to be laughed out of Les Deux May Go and never heard of again. And so I thought that way I could easily walk away and never look back if that's what was going to happen. But I didn't know, and it turned out, yes, Betty.
I heard you say on more than one occasion that you and Paul Laurence Dunbar have an agreement, and I wanted to ask you about your conversation with him about this event and what he said about it.
He said it was okay, and that I didn't have to read any of his work, that when I'm doing the Dunbar programs, I get to read one or two of my poems, but he gets the bulk of the evening. And that's perfectly all right. And I thought, as we were talking about this, it's easy enough for me to not read my work for some strange reason. And I haven't read here at the university, I think, since the late 80s. So I was saying, it's been over a decade since I've given a reading. I used to do it one reading a year to give my students the sense that it was an enterprise and they ought to be working towards that. And I try with each of the writing courses to have them all gather together and read. So in that sense, we've had a really nice ongoing conversation. I remember when Ron and I did the uncollected material, and we had it all done, and we were waiting for Henry Louis Gates to send us the preface. And we waited, and Henry's off somewhere in Europe or Africa, we didn't know. And the editor said, please, when are we going to get the preface? And I said, I don't know, but I will take care of it. And I marched myself to my car, and I drove over to the cemetery. And I got out at the stone, and I walked up to it, and I said, see here now. It's taken a dozen years to get all this stuff together, and we have written all the introductions, and everything is ready to go. We need you to light a fire under Henry and get the preface to David. I went back, and within a week and a half, David had he had the preface. So I think that there is something, I can go out there and talk to him, and he pays attention, and it works. So, so that's how I think. Yes.
As a poet, you distinctively communicate an interpretation of the world, your world, your world.
Yes.
What are some of the times where the Herbert Martin poet is not, or is the Herbert Martin a man?
Person?
Yes, or a person.
Let me see if I understand you. You're asking me when do the two come together?
Yes, and disassociate.
Yeah, or separate. I tend to think they separate when I'm giving a reading, because then I think it's work. And you have to go and you have to do a particular job, and you have to engage the audience in that job, and you have to do it as well as you can. When I'm done with that and I'm heading out the door, and I've read as well as I could, and there have been no trip-ups on the tongue, and then I reclaim my life, okay? And when I go home, because of my family, there's no grandstanding at all. The youngest of the grandchildren says, Grandpa, you're famous. You're really famous. But I tend not to pay attention to that, mainly because my mother used to say, you're going to break that elbow, patting yourself on the back. You know? So I can always hear her saying things like that about. And in fact, the other night I went to hear Angela Brown do a concert, and she went upstage and drank her water, and then she came back and faced the audience, and my mother said, "See." And that's because my mother told me when I was giving poetry readings, I'd reach over and water while I was talking. No, she said, you must not face the audience drinking. And I said, oh, Mama, it's all right. And then I decided, I'm giving this reading and I'll do what I want. So sometimes those two people argue about what it is that I'm supposed to do. I am almost always myself, Herb Martin, when I'm at home and doing the dishes or some kind of chore or mowing the lawn. From time to time I break into song, but the neighbors have gotten used to that. And I will sing louder than the electric mower, just to make sure that I hear it right. But when I go to read, especially if I go to another city, then I'm carrying the name of the town and my name as well. And so I have to do it as well as I can. so that they don't regret having invited me there or run me out of the town on a rail. So, two questions and now.
I'm wondering also, like you started doing poetry I think in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder about just sort of Afro-American experience. To what degree did you grab on to that and use it? I'm wondering what your high school education was like in literature.
It's pretty standard, and I read very, very precise, pristine kinds of poetry, Keats, Shelley, Byron, those people. We read Shakespeare. The junior class teacher took us through Romeo and Juliet, and then I think in the senior class we read Hamlet. I was familiar with the sonnets and all those things. A little thing, I wrote a poem, and it was all very standard English. By the time I got to the university, I was immersed in that. But I wrote a poem where the black lady was scuffling down the stairs. And the teacher said, I don't think you really mean scuffling. You must change that word. And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it a little more. And then I said, that's the right word. And I left it. And years later, she came back and she said, oh, I remember telling you that you should change that word. Well, that was the wrong instruction, she said. And I said, I sort of figured it out, and I left it the way it was. And that was when I began to hear the oral pronunciation of words in the black community. And I thought that it isn't she's struggling. She really is scuffling down. And that's harder. Harder struggle, and that's why it's got to be scuffle. And Miller Williams, the guy on the back here, was the nicest critic I've ever had, because he said, when you send me a poem and I will tell you to take this and this out, go back over those instructions, and then if you don't agree, tell me why it has to be this thing. So he published my first really long poem. And I said, and he said, take out some of these ands. But he got to the end, and that one, it really needed to be there. I said, you've got to have that upbeat. And so Miller, can we leave the last and in? Because if you don't, the music is a little bit too harsh by the end of the poem. And he wrote back and said, that's one that I missed. So, and I thought that was really kind of him to tell me that I could, even though he was the teacher and I was the student, that I could say, no, I don't think it works that way because, and then if I gave him some rational reasons, he would agree to it. And that sort of, I've been lucky that way with having people who do not tell me, do it because I said do it. You know, we can't do that anymore. My mother could say, because I said so, and she could get away with it, but I can't with my daughter and with my granddaughters. Yes.
It strikes me that the theme of memory has been important
Mm-hmm.
in your work,
Mm-hmm.
in your life. I mean, obviously the Dunbar stuff, but also some of your poems, the Deadwood Dick poems. And
Yes.
So I got to ask you, I guess, two-part question. First of all, with your work on Dunbar, I was really intrigued to read about that conference that you alluded to.
Yes.
That's in your 1972, bringing all these really important poets, Nikki Giovanni, here to university.
Yeah.
Could you talk just a little bit about, these revolutionary times, of reclaiming Dunbar, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what drove you to that, and then what was your response of that conference? And the second part of the question, kind of a little bit maybe more abstract, but could you just kind of maybe share with us your what the role of memory is in your work,
Okay.
both poetry and scholarship,
Okay.
and what you see the value,
Of
the
that,
meanings
yeah.
of memory
Okay.
for like living in the late 20th century, early.
Well, let me answer that one first. I think that I went off to graduate school late in '64, and got through the first half of it. Got all the way to Easter Monday, and my mother had a stroke. And given my mother's determination, she was going to work that Monday morning with an extraordinarily high blood pressure, and then collapsed on the streets. And they put her in the hospital. That Sunday, somebody in Buffalo had loaned me their car, and I had driven all the way to New York City because Marian Anderson was giving her farewell Easter Sunday, because she had sang Easter Sunday at the Washington Monument. So that time she wanted to end in New York City. I got to New York, of course, and to make the long story longer, there were no tickets to be had for the Marian Anderson concert. And given that I was young and brash, I knew where the back door to Carnegie Hall was, and I just marched myself right from 57 to 56 and to the stage door, at which point I just pushed the stage door open and I walked right in, and I kept on walking until I reached the Carnegie Auditorium, at which point the lights were about to go down, and I quickly spotted in 3 rows empty seats. And as the light descended, the great lady was coming out, and I whirled around and down, and I plopped myself there. And I said to myself, if somebody comes and claims this seat, you know where 2 others are, and you just say, sorry, I didn't want to delay the recital. And nobody came. And so I brashly just went in, okay. Back to your question of memory, what happened was I come back home that Monday night, because it was a long drive from New York City back to Buffalo. And I get into the apartment, and my roommate says, come in, I have some, your mother is ill, you must go home. And so I walked back and prayed all night long, but I got to Toledo and went to visit my mother. And 2 of my friends, the composer pianists, they decided to send me money for some reason. And they said, don't pass back, just write a poem. And that was the beginning of the W poems. And they're called W because of my mother's given maiden name and her surname, Willie Mae Woodward. So that's where the Woodward in my name comes from. Because she said, doesn't my family get a chance to get in there? And so I said, okay, so it'll be Herbert Woodward Martin. And it seemed like to me that was the longest name in the world to have people introduce you like that. But that's part of the memory. And so then I started to write W poems. And my father, uncles, all of them drank a good deal. And in fact, the uncle would come home after having been inebriated, and he'd call out, Louisa, Louisa, Poet is home. And, and she would say, oh man, leave me alone. And I remember that from childhood. And so some of those things have come back and crept into the poems. So memory plays a really interesting part. Sometimes I am talking to myself as Herb Martin, and I think Uncle Ed and all those people worried Cousin Lou to death because she dies. He lived into his 80s. And I'm thinking that she must have been somewhere in her late 40s or early 50s. So he outlives about 30 years, with drinking and alcohol and whatever else. And I sometimes say it's a shame that they worried you to death like that. But then I remember all the good things that she did, and some of that comes out in poem. So memory plays a good deal with that kind of thing. I saw some people in Europe once. I've forgotten whether it was a German city or not, but it was a holiday, and all the citizens came out, and they were going to the war memorials and putting flowers down. And I thought that that was a nice way to remember the citizens of the town that had passed away from whatever it was. So in that sense, I start to play not only on my own memories, but the memories of other people, and it shows up in that way. I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, no. And then
Okay.
could you just talk a little about the conference
Yeah,
you organized?
I was in Miriam Hall and on the 8th floor, and looking out over the cemetery. And I came in after teaching a class, and I dropped my African American lit book on the desk, and it fell open. And I looked down, and it said Paul Laurence Dunbar, 1872-1906. And I thought, oh my goodness, within a year and a half, he would have been 100. So why don't you write all the people that you know and ask them to come to Dayton, and we'll have this marathon reading of Dunbar. And sure enough, Etheridge Knight came, and Sonia Sanchez came, and Paula Marshall, the novelist, came, and Alice Walker came, and Margaret Walker was there, and Giovanni, and an actress who did one season with Sanford and Son. No. The people who moving on up.
The Jeffersons.
Jeffersons. And she decided that she didn't like it, but she came and read an evening of Dunbar that Friday night, I think. And it was something like 16 or 18 novelists and poets, and Saunders Redding and Margaret Walker were the critics. And it was a really great time, but I didn't know how I was going to pay for all of that. I had no idea. I had invited all these people, and B.J. Bedard, rest his soul, came up with enough funds, and the Marianist Society came up with the rest, and we paid off all these people. We flew them all in and flew them all out, with the exception of Margaret Walker, who would not fly. She came by train all the way from Mississippi to Chicago to Dayton, Ohio, and that's where she went back home. But everybody else flew. And so we paid off all the flight fares and put them up at the hotel, which is on 3rd and what's the L word? It's across from the City Hall. I've forgotten what the name of it is called
Crown
now.
Plaza?
Yeah. No, Crown Plaza is on 5th.
Doubletree?
Doubletree. But they were there, and I walked in the first night, and they were all in the lounge. And I thought, oh my God, they are spending me and eating me into bankruptcy. That's all I could think of. And of course, Etheridge was like one of my uncles who drank a lot. But when he came on stage, you didn't know that, because it was serious time for work, and that's what he did. But it was a fantastic time, and Ron said there was a book there, and told me that, and gave stuff to do it, but I really didn't quite believe it. and the guy who ran his centennial, which came after ours, in Irvine, California, decided that it was a book there, and so he borrowed all the stuff that was written from my thing and published it in his book, but we didn't get any credit for it. So, but that's how sometimes scholarship works. I still remember that. I shouldn't. We got to X that out. Because that wouldn't be nice to say but they did. 'Tis pity, 'tis true, 'tis true, 'tis pity, 'tis. Your son is mad. Madam. One, and then I'll read.
Okay, yeah, partly just a comment, when you're talking about, how you prepare for your performances, so that, it seems to me you could read a phone book and it'd sound good. That,
Yeah. You know
that doesn't
what?
mean you don't work at it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, but that was a comment. I'd like to hear you read the W poem on page 57. I think this line that we change in the, wait a second, we look desperately upon the small articles of circumstance. For some reason, that
Yes.
just hung in my head.
Okay. You bring up a terrible thing that I remember. In New York, I was getting around and somebody asked me to come and read on one of those early PBS radio stations. And her name was Florence Becker Lennon, and she was an expert on one of the English humorists. And she said, like you said, you read so well, she said, you can probably take a bad poem and convince the audience that it is good. And in my very arrogant way, I said, oh no, my dear, I try never to read anything that's bad. And I never missed a beat, and I just went on, and I thought afterwards, that's a pretty arrogant thing to say. But on the other hand, I practice at reading because, you don't want to have an audience come and then you read to them poorly and you miss the words and you don't put the endings of the words on the word. And then they'll say, oh my God, that was just the most god-awful thing that we ever went to. And they don't want to go to poetry readings again, ever. And so I try to practice and to be up with some energy. I think that's fair enough. Let me see if I can read. This is the first W poem, and I inscribed it to Gordon Hibbert because he was one of the ones who sent me the money. And it says, Pieces Towards an Autobiography. Mother, it was deep into midnight when I heard you had fallen ill with a stroke. I spent the late hours before morning pacing prayer in the close dark of my heart. We change in the circumstance of time as best we can. When you lost your balance, the citizens said they found you amusing, stumbling towards death. In the haste of Monday morning, they remained thoroughly suspicious about you, who they thought had extended your weekend past their pleasure. We look desperately upon the small articles of circumstance. I look over the photographs hung in the corridors of your house, touch a memory here and there to acquaint myself sufficiently with your adjacent time, correlate those histories light should touch upon, and allow what is contained in this house to consider your possible passing. I know certain winds braze the flesh. I have seen the moonlight search a stone. A grain of water will insist upon a seed. walking through these rooms disturbs the dust, breaks the cobwebs, splinters the heart, and hardens the marrow. Tears blind the visions. I catch the wind and cloud in my eyes these days, Mother. That is the way truth is. I catch the sun also in my eyes. I cannot distinguish between the tears of the elements and the heart. Things are sometimes that difficult when we pray. If I were permitted, Mother, to tell you of my single madness, I would say I have spent hours of formal smiles, that I possess a clown's image, that mastery of it lies in fitting my face to the mold. It is a strange music played in a different key from your rhapsody. Is that enough?
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Okay. So what I started out doing was just trying to address the poem to my mother, then my father, then my stepfather. Then there was a man in the neighborhood, I can say this now, who I assume was gay. But the community tolerated him. And he was a very pleasant man, and he had an original Charlie McCarthy doll, which for some reason he decided to give to me so I could become a ventriloquist. And that stayed in my possession and in my mother's house until she passed away, and I think one of the cousins got it. That can be on that, so they can know that I'm accusing them. But that, yeah, yes.
I've heard you say a couple of times that your wife, Sue, is a better poet than you.
Yes.
What do you mean?
I mean that she is a better poet. There are some poets who are better, and I think she is better, but I am dogged at it. And that means that I keep doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. Some people have to have a whole space wherein they can work without being troubled and bothered. And I think that that's how my wife works, and then the poems really flow for her. But for me, I better do it while I have my arm can move across the page. I remember Robert Hayden saying, "Oh, you know, dear boy, if I had waited until I was tired, I might never have gotten anything written." And that sort of frightens me, that there are poets who wait until they retire, and then they try to hurry and get it all done. And I'm working at it rather consistently, tediously. I nip at the heels of it. But I think there are poets, there are pianists who are better. Serkin, Rubinstein, and I'm going to say the man from France were at the top of their game, always. I think maybe Andre Watts is still at the top of his game. So we've got to invent another black person to take over from him. Stop it! There's a guy up here who says bad things to me all the time. He makes me say outrageous things in public. We've got maybe with Angela Brown, there's the possibility of another Leontine Price, another Grace Bumbry, another Shirley Verrett. We used to be one to death, the black people. We had one preacher, we had one singer, we had one actor. Yeah, it's true. And we finally got tired of it, and we said, there's more of us out there, and why don't you give some of us a chance? For the longest time, Ralph Ellison was the black novelist. And finally, Toni Morrison crept up behind him and outdid him, and so she got the Nobel Prize. But for the longest time, I always heard that he was next in line to get it, and you just have to go around. But she just kept writing these brilliant novels, And he only wrote that one. And I wish that he had written a second bad one and then gone on to the third one, which would have been better, which is always sort of the way it happens. But he kept revising that second one and revising it and revising it. And it took 20 years to write the first novel, 30 years to write the second one, and he still didn't do it. So that's how Toni Morrison caught up with him. So I never look back. I just keep them. But she really is good. And if she had all of the time and the energy, and nobody asking her to grade papers and that kind of thing, she'd probably overtake me, and that would be it. But I can't wait for other people to do my work. I've got to do it myself. So I think that's the difference. When I was in New York, I learned that whatever it was I wanted to do, there were 10 people who were as good as I was, 10 who were better, and 10 who were worse. And I had to be in the right place at the right time for it all to work out as well as it could. But I think that that's true. I still think that that's true. Yes, ma'am.
When I read your poem advertisement,
Yes.
I hear your voice reading Paul Laurence Dunbar, and I'm wondering if that's a particular dialogue with Dunbar, or is it just my memory of your readings?
It may be your memory, because I was trying at that point to be funny. And I don't know what page it's on now.
177.
Oh, good for you. Bless your heart. I have to take you with me, because then I won't have. It's nice to have people who know what page. 'Cause you don't want poets to do this. I know it's here somewhere. And they fiddle, and you would think, why didn't they just mark that, what they wanted to? I saw this in The Village Voice, and it sort of intrigued me. And then I got the idea that there were those people in the Arab world, the East, who wanted wives, and they started advertising for wives. And so I wrote this. Advertisement. Husband wanted. None but those with the following refined qualities need apply. You must possess the ability to tickle silk. You need not possess the static cling of electricity. You must be willing to love any woman named Julianne Pizza and enter her life with hat in hand, preferably riding a palomino of distinguished breed, vowing to be a party to everything the horse is inclined to do. You must hate zits and do everything possible to eradicate them from the body politic. You must love bubble gum and children on hot blue days, as well as those days which are exactly the opposite, because I am a woman who requires it. I do not wish to present myself as niggling on the subject. I want to be clear and non-deceptive. Otherwise, there would be no wisdom whatsoever in my having paid for this advertisement. Now, let me tell you where that came from. If you all pass your little papers down that way, it came from my playing an experiment with these words, and then I will stop and you can ask Ron anything that you want to ask him. But it turns out, and I'm doing this because Marilyn has encouraged me to do this. How about we let John make them all go the same way? Oh, no, let's, well, here, no, you film, somebody else's.
Some are folded.
Yeah, unfold them and put them all together and have them all go the same way. The advertisement poem came from this kind of experiment where I will read you off the words, and then what I will try to do is to create a poem on the spot, and we'll see if that works or not. Okay. Yes.
I want to know what you talked about with Ezra Pound. Or is it not my business?
I walked, oh, yeah, I walked in, and here's what happened. There was a young lady in the post office, and her name was Anna Maria Mazzolini. I've never forgotten. And she knew where Pound ate, and she took me to the restaurant. Well, they said he had been there yesterday, but not that day. And finally, we persuaded them to point out the alcove where he had his apartment. We went, and there on the door it said E. Pound. We knocked on the door, and the housekeeper came. And he said, I am Professor Martin. I'm from the University of Dayton. I would like my respects to Ezra Pound and thank him for what he has done for 20th century poetry. And she disappeared. And along comes Olga Rudge, his longtime female companion. And I gave her that spiel again. And she said to me, I think Mr. Pound has ascended. So I thought, oh my God, he's died on me. So then I went, no, she disappears. And she comes back, and she says, please to come in. He has not gone up yet. He was going up for his afternoon nap. And so at which point I grabbed Anna Maria's arm because she was going to disappear. And I said, please come. Oh, no, no, no. She said, so we both went in, and we sat, and we had coffee and cookies. And I started to ask him about were there going to be any more cantos? And of course, that was the wrong thing to ask because Olga Rudge says, we do not ask him that. I said, why not? She says, because, and Ginsberg says the reason is if he didn't feel like writing, she didn't nag him and encourage him to do that. And I said, well, I wonder why she let me in, because I said to her, oh, you must have lots of people knocking on the door. Oh, no, she said, I send them away. But why didn't she send me away? But Ginsberg said she wanted decent reports coming back that Pound would talk, and he would talk. And so I asked him frivolous things after that, because I thought, I only want to know if he's writing and if he's producing more cantos, but she thought that that would really upset him and make him feel ill at ease if he didn't write more cantos. And I thought, no, it's just, he knows. And so then I began to ask him about when he came to give the Emerson Lowell lectures and things like that. But I think he was a little bit trapped there because I asked him something and I said, Mr. Pound, such and such and so and so. And he wouldn't say anything. I said, Mr. Pound, such and such and so and so. And he wouldn't say anything. I said, Mr. Pound, such and such and so and so. And Olga Rudge said, Ezra! And he answered. Just right away, he said, blah, 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 and it was the right answer. And I thought, poor man, he's locked up in this house with Olga Rudge, and there's nothing he can do about it, and I couldn't help him out, so I didn't. So anyway, then we will let Ron come up, and you can ask him all the gossip, which isn't true, that's in his book. That's a joke. Primaries: extreme unction, transubstantiation, escape, resolve, stiffen, generosity. There's a little doodad on the back. It looks like a flower. 22, showy, blackberry, meandering, big word. Mindfulness, being, tendril, inscribing, blizzard, hope, awareness, hyssop, comb, identity, hope, presence, and child. Okay. Oh, forgot the first word, which is primaries. Okay, what all poets do is they try to get a sense of the words. Okay, that's one sense. They inhale the words and taste them. They try to listen to each word and hear the syllables and the rhythms in those words. They try as best they can to touch those words and become one with those words. And they certainly have to see them, is the final one. And then what you hope for is for a little magic. So 1, 2, 3. A long time ago, when I was just a little child, the old woman said, "Come here, son, I have something to tell you. We are entering that awful period of the primaries where we have to figure out under extreme unction who to vote for. But I tell you, somehow or other, even though we form our opinions because of transubstantiation," she said, "we have to find one way to escape all of this business, to resolve it in some kind of way. And when you are as old as I am, you will understand what it is to stiffen up your backbone and go into the voting booth and stand there with a kind of generosity and start to punch 1, 2, 3 until you get to 22. And you are not being showy by trying to vote for the right person. You are sometimes just a simple little blackberry growing somewhere on somebody's tree. You are sometimes just a meandering soul trying to figure out again, perspicuously, the big word of life, always trying to be mindful that somebody, somewhere in some audience will trip you up and knock your being to the floor as if they thought they were being Sartre. No matter, she said, you must understand that there are tendrils in life, and that you must somehow take at least one of those tendrils and begin inscribing your name in the blizzard, even though it is snowy and you cannot see your hand reaching for the paper. You must somehow, with a great deal of hope, inscribe your name. Learn to be what awareness is. Learn to be aware of yourself, and always, always, she said, avoid the cup of hyssop, because somehow or other she thinks that they gave a cup of that to some philosopher somewhere a long time ago. And then she said, always, always carry with you a comb, a yellow comb, so that you can always fix all the police on the beat, and comb your hair and identify each one so that you know that you, some kind of hope, will come to the presence in that booth and make the right decision. Go, child, she says. I have taught you all that an old woman can teach you. Now you must learn how to be a man. Thank you.
If you, in my book, I talk a little bit about the New York days, and Herb was doing this word game at Les Deux Magots. There was a poetry machine of some kind. I can't remember what the name of it is, but somehow words went in and came out, and it was a brainstorming technique. It was a marvelous brainstorming technique. And Herb doesn't talk much about why he does this. He just lets everybody think about what just happened. Why was it funny? You know, it was funny because it's kind of absurd, but it was funny because it's kind of a send-up of literature in a way. But it's also funny because we suddenly realize, and we relax, and we realize that we should be more playful with words, and that we could do this. Everybody in the room could write this kind of stuff, and write these kind of poems, and play with it, and be brainstorming, and empower yourself. An overused word, I know, but kind of interesting. If you go down to Toledo and go to the Kennedy Center, one of the things you can do, one of Douglas Brinkley's many books is one of his best, I think, is called The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter. And somebody's going to have to write the unfinished works of Herbert Martin at some point, because there's always going to be some. If he lives to be 156, there's still going to be some, because there's an awful lot of projects going on. And a lot of that stuff is down there. And there's an Ezra Pound project. You asked about Ezra Pound. There's a big Ezra Pound project that was going to be magnificent. But the realities of things, the permissions, the lack of cooperation of various people, the controversies, put an end to it. Herb had worked his head off on this thing. It's down there. It's magnificent, and you can read it. There's a whole lot of other things there that you can read. Does anybody want to ask me anything after that? Wow.
That's a tough act to follow.
Sorry?
That's a very tough act to follow.
Oh, yeah, I'll say that.
Got a few more pieces of paper left.
Yeah, there's a few more people. You want me to do it?
Anybody can
You want me to do it? He emboldened me one time when we were at a conference. We traveled to conferences together at different times, and there was an open mic thing, and he wanted to go to it, and I said, oh, I'll go with you. And we each had a couple of glasses of wine, I think. And so I decided I was going to write this poem about him and read it at the thing. I don't know what in the world I was thinking of, but it turned out to be a send-up of Dudley Randall's Booker T and W.E.B. You know that poem where the Booker T and W.E.B. are debating? Well, this one was called Herbie and P.L.D., and it was a dialogue between Herbert and Paul Laurence Dunbar. And I sort of captured the Dudley Randall thing, and people laughed. Herb was not too aghast. He said, keep your day job, though. So I'm not going to try to do that. Yes?
Yes, I saw on the back of the book that you're an expert in literature of the Midwest. And I was wondering, are there different groupings of poets in the Midwest or schools of thought? And does Herb kind of belong to one of them? And if so, what would it be? But then how would he be distinctive within that?
I don't know if there are schools within the Midwest, but there's definitely a Midwestern writers. There's a group called the Society for the Study of Midwestern Literature. Meets annually. Their meeting is this week, Thursday through Saturday. And their website is ssml.org. You should go to it. It's one of the best organizations ever. And they study the Midwestern characteristics within writers and the achievements of Midwestern writers. Herb was given the award one year for achievement in literature of the Midwest and went to their banquet and received the award. And he, boy, oh boy, that question would be to categorize Herb, which can never be done in any way. One of the things I learned while writing this book was that he doesn't get categorized. The question about the Black Arts Movement, he was a part of it, but against it. He was himself all the time. So Ohio, yeah, Midwestern, but also raised in Alabama and influenced by these various people. He's not like Iowa poets, I don't think, but he is like other Ohio writers and like Michigan writers. He's really from Michigan. That's a long secret that we're going to reveal now. That group is terrific. You'd love it. You'd just love it. There are journals that come out every year, and the question is still going on, what is the Midwest? How do you define it geographically? What is it culturally? What are the values of it? Was Dunbar a Midwestern poet? I think so, but with Southern mixtures of all kinds, and Herb could probably speak to that better. Yes?
There are a number of literary scholars in the room, and many of us do work on writers that have been dead for years. Can you talk a little bit about the complications of being a scholar on a subject who's been a friend for as long as.
Oh, wow. One thing that made it so good, the question is about how you work on a living writer, first of all, and one who has been a very close friend for so long. Should you even do it, I suppose, would be the question. Can you be objective? I struggled with that. First of all, the easy part is that Herb is always so cooperative in many ways, you know, in every way conceivable. He's not going to throw roadblocks around. And as you literary scholars and other people in the room know, the only thing worse than living authors throwing roadblocks is the relatives of recently deceased authors throwing roadblocks in your way. But so I didn't have any roadblock like that. I struggled myself with the question of how to deal with, how can I be objective about such a good friend? Probably not. And so I didn't know whether I should ever do it. I tinkered around, let it incubate a while, thought about it. I was influenced by a lot of people I thanked at the beginning of the book, and one person who stands out is Renee Shingles, who is a colleague of mine at Central Michigan. Her field is sports medicine. But she took me aside and said, look, instead of trying to confront that and argue with it, embrace it and write a different kind of study. And the book starts with us having dinner together. It doesn't sound anything like a literary analysis. And I like to think maybe a little bit ahead of the time. Now there's a new wave of new genres going on. Alt-Dis, there's a book called Alt-Dis, Alternative Discourse, and we're going to loosen up a little bit. We're not going to abandon the old ways of doing literary scholarship or the rigor. We're going to loosen them up and let in the questions through different genres that couldn't get addressed otherwise, and we're going to stop squeezing out things that don't fit the previous model. So that made me feel better, at least. And then working over a very long time in the collection in Toledo made it seem like I was dealing with somebody who wasn't around, because there was that collection. And I would try not to remember that I knew this person so well. And that I could just solve this problem. Instead of struggling with it and coming to the collection a lot, I could just call him up on the phone and ask him. You know, that was just too easy. So I just stopped doing that for a while. Stop pestering the man and go for it yourself. So those kind of struggles. I don't know if it came out objective at all. Somebody might look at this and say, this is not objective. I'm not sure anything ever is. And so there were no problems in terms of getting access to material. Well, I'll tell you one problem that occurred, though. I was told, and you probably read yourself, that Picasso's friends used to take his paintings away from him when they could. You know, they'd actually steal them away for a while with the cooperation of a relative or something, because he, in their opinion, kept ruining them. By revising them over and over again, he would take something everybody loved and paint over it, and it would be gone forever. Pablo, you just destroyed your own painting. It's mine, I'll do what I want with it. Well, Herb didn't exactly do that, but he kept shifting things around. So I'd be starting off in a collection with something, and the thing would be in an unpublished collection. And when you read the book, you'll see that I'm talking about stuff that isn't published. And I quote bountifully from it because it's not published. But then all of a sudden that thing would turn up to be in a book that would get published. And so I'd have to go back and fix it. And during the 7, 8, 9 years that I'm working on this thing, I had to go back and rework a lot of things because he kept messing them up in some way or another. Yes?
Are your research notes and files, and I guess, you know, if you did any tape recordings of interviews with Herb, are those in the Herb Martin collection, or are you planning on donating?
We never taped any interviews
Okay.
that I had with him, but there's a lot of tapes of him in there, of various things, readings and interviews and radio shows and various things. There is, when Sue said he was a pack rat of effluvium, that is a compliment, as long as you get the stuff out of my house. But it is terrific. It's got programs and manuscripts and letters and tapes of all kinds and scraps of paper that he wrote stuff on. He always wrote stuff on scraps of paper. And I guess there's a book coming called the Endnotes Poems. Yeah, the Flyleaf Poems. And so there's a lot of wonderful stuff like that. And if he and I wrote, he put it in there. If you wrote to him, it's probably in there. If there are letters that you and he exchanged, it's probably in there. Be careful. Yes.
To speak on your point about objectivity, it seems to me I think the story that you open with the dinner, that so much speaks to the man with the, the idea that something you said to him about the Depression. He goes home and writes a poem that he shares with you the next day, and right away you know that's the nature of the passion of the artist, that creative needing to express yourself that way. And I mean, I think had you been less enamored with him as a friend, or less inclined to share an evening like that, that would have been lost.
Yeah, I
That
probably
would
never
been
would have
lost.
known that dimension.
Exactly.
And then furthermore, I don't know if I went on about this, but the next day he was teaching a class in town which I attended. This was in Detroit, this happened. And he let me bring the poem in and say, look what he wrote this morning after we talked last night. And so talk about a living artist sharing. That's what teaching is. That's probably what writing is, sharing, discovering, always discovering something. Yes, pretty magnificent. The doggy box thing is kind of interesting too, blobbing up all this stuff. That's probably what writers' research is. Other stuff. We're running out of time. Time for me to get off. Give me the hook.
Okay.
John, I want to thank John again for everything he's done. I've been emailing John now ever since he invited us. I've been emailing him for several weeks, and I would come up with new questions all the time. What else can you tell us about what we might do? And some of the things that are in the movie that we captured from around Dayton are things that Herb could have told us, but he's just too humble to tell us. And furthermore, even when we did make the connections, he would then call up the people and say, are you sure it's all right that they can come here because you're busy? So on. So thank you, John. Thank you very much.
And I searched the world over the last week after talking to Herb last week to find a present for him to remember us by. I don't know if this will one day end up in Toledo or if Sue will sell it on eBay. There's apparently a deal here that is an understanding. And so I want to try to open it without hurting it too much. It's from California. And it just arrived. I didn't know if it would get here. It's not the perfect copy. Let me just take the price out of it's in there. Herb, this is a present. I know it's not in perfect shape.
Thank you kindly. Oh, it's Roland Hayes's songbook. And I was telling John that when I was really very young and taking voice lessons in Toledo, I discovered that this once was in the Toledo Public Library. And once I came here, I got it through the interlibrary loan, and then I Xeroxed all the pages. But he has a whole series of songs called The Life of Christ. I cannot tell you that without Ron and John, these are my two most enthusiastic voices for my work, and I am humbled by them and deeply grateful that they have taken so much care for my work. So thank you. This is I know, you know what, he's on a series of records in the Library of Congress. And so I pretty much know all of these, and if you want, I'll do one of these, and we'll call it quits. Plenty good room, plenty good room. There is room in my Father's kingdom. kingdom. Plenty good room, there is good room, just to choose your seat and sit down. Oh, glory to the Prince of Peace. He clothed himself with clay. He entered the iron gates of hell, and he took his old sting away. Oh, plenty good room, there is good room, so much room in my Father's kingdom. Plenty good room, there is good room, just to choose your seat and sit down. Thank you. Thank you.
And if anybody wants their book signed, I think Herb or Ron are willing to do that.
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much.
We would be very happy.
Ask David something quickly. Thanks for that great question.
Oh, yeah. I'll be right back.